Oh, there's Gretchen. Okay, I'm gonna, I don't see any, oh, there we go.
Just one, oh, there you are. I want to make sure she was promoted. We have one call-in listener. Not certain of the phone number, but we have one call-in listener.
Okay.
Okay.
Good morning, everybody. We're going to start the Finance Committee meeting. And I'm going to start with, there's one agenda item today. It's a proposed look at the 2022-2023 budget. So give me a second. I'm going to share my screen. You all should have received these documents as well. Can everybody see that?
Yes, I can.
Yes? Okay.
Yeah, thanks.
All right, so we're going to start out. This is a repeater from my last presentation, just to remind everybody what the guiding principles are in developing the budget for the district. So it's to educate and develop all students as learners and citizens who are high achieving, resilient, and responsible in a changing global community. I won't go through all the bullets, but those are the things that we are looking to do when we're building the budget to make sure that we provide these things for our students. Our budget process timeline, you'll see in the red that we're at April 7th, and this is the review of the 22-23 budget with the Finance Committee. This will be repeated at the end, so we'll talk about what needs to happen in the upcoming couple of months with budget. This is also a repeater slide so that we have a look back at what the Act 1 index was and what previous tax increases are. You'll see that 22-23 right now is the bolded line. Act 1 index came in at 3.4 this year. Right now, as we go through this, we'll have a proposed tax increase that we can discuss, and we'll fill that in as we move forward. So in building the budget, wanted to go through some of the assumptions that I used in building the budget on the revenue side. So with our real estate tax revenue, we did have an increase of our overall assessment in our township. It increased 0.75% from previous year. It went from 1.317 to 1.320, as you see now. That positively impacts our tax revenue. At this point, we are proposing a millage increase of 2.8% or 0.09893 mils, and this will generate an additional about 1.26 million in tax revenue. You'll see here that I put the value of a mil at 1.28. Some of you might be wondering if you're doing math in your head real quick, as some people do who like math. A 2.8 is the equivalent of 1.26, but the value of increasing by a mil is 1.28, which might not make sense to some people. What you need to understand in calculating tax increases is you take your overall assessment. We have to back out any of the property tax rebate subsidy that we get from the government, from the state. And then you have to identify what your tax collection rate. So you'll see down there that our tax collection rate this year is 97%. That increased last year from 96 to 97, because you have to anticipate that you're not going to collect 100% of your tax revenue in a fiscal year. So that's why the tax increase looks a little bit different than the actual value of a mill. If we had 100% tax increase and no reduction of property taxes, then obviously we could use the full value of a mill. So just wanted to explain that really quickly if that didn't make sense. Another revenue assumption for the big revenue items is real estate transfer tax. With the real estate transfer tax, I do a 5-year historical trend on what we actually collect. And obviously in any given year, the real estate tax market or the economy can impact this. So I try to do a trend on collections because this is one of those ones that could yo-yo up and down. So looking at our 5-year historical trend, we're at about 700,000 on that average. So that is what I budgeted. On our earned income tax revenue, which is another big local revenue, it's a 5-year historical trend. We're indicating about a 2.5 to 3% annual increase on our EIT, which is positive. And then I also receive an analytical analysis by Berkheimer, who collects our EIT taxes. So they provide me with a analysis. I also use the trend between both of those. I'm able to determine the comfort level of what to put in budget and see. It really, based upon Berkheimer's analysis, the historical trend of 2.5 to 3 is holding steady. So that is what was built into the budget. And then state revenue, I always reflect prior year allocations because the state budget usually isn't passed until we're pretty much through our budget. So at this point, we hold steady with current year allocations, and then we'll adjust accordingly, obviously, if those subsidies come in a little bit higher. Retirement and Social Security on the state side are reflective and adjusted according to our salary number. We get 50% back reimbursement for the state for both of those subsidies. And then on the federal side, our title funding, it's the same as state. It reflects what our current year allocations are because they have held steady. If you look back at historical trends, it's pretty flatline with state and federal revenue. On the federal side, with the exception, obviously, of the ESSER funds that have been allocated to school districts. So you'll see in the budget that we have appropriated the remaining balance of our CARES Act ESSER 2 funding, and we've begun to implement our ARP Act, which we're calling ESSER 3 funding. So both of those monies that are built in under the federal revenue side are also reflected in the expenses. So it'll reflect our anticipated use on those. So this is a snapshot of what our revenues are coming in at, and you'll see on the left-hand side in the light blue column that that's what our approved budget was for this year. And we're looking at the darker blue, and that is our proposed budget. So that gives you a comparative snapshot between the 2 years and shows you where the differences are. It is reflective of those revenue assumptions that I built in that I just spoke about. So as you'll see, we are, with those assumptions, we're looking at about a $3 million increase in our revenues at about 5%. So the next slide, we're going to talk about the impact of the pandemic and how it's affected our community educationally and economically, and how that has affected our programs and our budget. So on the program side, same as last year, we talked about this when we were talking about ESSER funds, is that students will require compensatory educational services, including academic and social emotional support, assistance in developing skills to be successful in the next grade, and credit recovery in order to meet on-time graduation requirements. With our ESSER funding, our remaining ESSER 2 funding and our ARP Act ESSER funding, that will assist with the implementation of additional student support and interventions to address those programmatic needs that have developed because of the pandemic. On the budget side, the budget will reflect current economic conditions. Obviously, interest rates are slowly starting to rise a little bit, but not at the levels that we saw pre-pandemic. So that will impact our investment earnings. And then overall US inflation rate, as of the last report that was put out, is about 7.9%, which obviously impacts the cost of goods and services. So that will impact our supplies that we get in and some of the ordering. So we're seeing some price increases because economically that's what's happening across the United States. And then on the other side of delivering those goods and services, it's increased oil and gas prices, which will impact the shipping cost of those things. So our expenditure assumptions built into the budget, the first and foremost is all of our contractual obligations, which account for approximately 87.5% of our budget. So these are items that we really do not have wiggle room to cut. So that doesn't leave a lot of areas for us to be able to trim down on the budget because we have these obligations. So first and foremost, it starts with salaries and benefits. Our salary and benefits includes new positions. There's 2 special education teachers to provide additional intervention support. A social study teacher that's going from 0.5 FTE to a full FTE. We have a gifted teacher at a 0.5 FTE. 1 assistant principal / athletic director at our middle school, an administrative assistant that is going from part-time to full-time, which will bring equity among all the buildings. And then an additional grounds person that we're building in, because if you've passed the Church Road property, you're seeing that it's moving along nicely, and we will have additional acreage for our grounds crew to cover. So we need an additional grounds person to be able to absorb the additional work that will have to go into that property. And then on the other side, we have leases and rentals, educational and operational license renewals, custodial service contracts, our security service contracts, utilities, and debt service. So those are things that we have those numbers. We're contracted to pay those obligations. So those get put into the budget first and foremost. On the other side of things that we have built into the budget, on the technology side, we have added 60 PC and Mac replacement devices, and this will support the high school TV studio and labs. Those current devices that we're placing are about 7 to 8 years old. We have 45 upgraded smart boards for the middle school and the high school. The current devices that they are replacing are about 11 to 12 years old. So currently we have new devices in Enfield Elementary and Erdenheim Elementary. And then there were some replacements done this year at the high school and middle school. So this will complete that replacement of those smart boards for the secondary level. We have 600 Chromebook replacement for grades 6 through 8. The current devices are 4 years old, so they're coming off of their lease, and they will be used at Erdenheim to replace devices that cannot be repaired. So the devices that are being used from the middle school down to Erdenheim, they are the same devices, and what they will do is go into our inventory, and as those Chromebooks cannot be repaired or can't get sent out anymore, we'll be able to have an inventory to replace those with the same devices. The plan is for the rotation is that Erdenheim will be next and the new devices next year. So this will afford us to be able to allow another year out of those Erdenheim devices. And then district-wide device replacement for our support staff, and those current devices are about 7 to 8 years old. The other area which we touched upon in the last slide was our programmatic effect from the pandemic and how we're using the ARP Act ESSER 3 funds in order to implement some supports and interventions for our students. So under the ESSER funding that's built into this next year's budget, we have salary and benefits. So there are additional staff members that are being funded for the next 2 years out of our ESSER 3 funds. It's 2 special ed teachers and 2 math specialists that will assist with implementing those supports and intervention for students. We have cybersecurity plan implementation. This was actually discussed at a previous meeting. And because of the fact that we went 1-to-1 and we've upgraded a lot of technology because of the pandemic, and we've moved into a 1-to-1 setting here, we need to make sure, and with cyber attacks, I'm sure you are all aware all over the place that there are cyber attacks. We want to make sure that our infrastructure is strong and we have things in place to have preventative measures for cybersecurity. Also included with the cybersecurity, if you don't recall, there is insurance coverage for cybersecurity, but it's becoming strict that if you do not have an implementation plan to prevent cybersecurity, you will not get insured. They won't do anything to help you with that in case you do experience a cyber attack and experience losses. Also with the ARP ESSER funding, we have a continuation of our Spartan Summer Academy and student interventions for this upcoming summer. We have social emotional learning, student support and staff development, and mental health student support. So those are interventions and supports that will be coming in to play next year through the budget with the ARP ESSER funding. So this is a snapshot of our expenditures and the assumptions that were built in. It gives a preview from last year to this year, or this year to next year. You'll see that there some changes of about 3.32%. Just a little explanation on that pink area, because it can be a little deceiving that we're pulling back about 75% of expenditures. So basically, we did a chart of accounts restructuring in the business office. And because of that, we've made specific departments. We've made different levels on where things were generalized before, and now they're specific to buildings and departments. So it basically just aligns us with PDE's chart of accounts. So it allows us to be able to report more efficiently and effectively when we have to do our budget reporting and our annual financial reporting. So the net effect of the schools and departments and other expenditures is an increase of $251,563. So I don't want it to be mistaken that we're taking 75% of funding away from our expenditures and then and just fluffing it all into the buildings and departments. It's just really a chart of account restructure. Does that make sense to everybody? Okay. And then we've continued to build in the capital transfer for our bus replacement. This helps us so that when it's time to replace buses, and we'll be having that conversation in the upcoming months about bus replacement, we have the funding set aside for that. So we build that into our budget. And then obviously our debt service. We had that nice refunding that happened at the beginning of this year that will impact next year's budget. We have another refunding that'll be coming up after the fiscal year starts. So we're hoping for even more savings. But right now, this is what our debt service structure looks like. So at this point, we are proposing a 2.8% tax increase. And with that 2.8% tax increase, we anticipate using about $1.4 million in fund balance. So this gives a little snapshot of some of the options of the different levels of tax increases. So obviously we're at a 2.8 is what we're proposing. It's generating about 1.267 million in additional tax revenue. The impact on our fund balance will be a use of $1.4 million. The impact on a median homeowner monthly is $12.52. And annually $150.20. Those numbers are estimated because the gaming money is not certified until May 1st. So I will not know what our allocation is. So I just used the allocation we received this year to kind of give an idea of what the impact to the homeowner is going to be. Going up to a 3%. And as you go up, basically what it does is minimizes the use of fund balance. So going from a 2.8 to a 3.4, we're looking at use of fund balance of 1.4 or 1.1 with an impact on the homeowner of $150 a year to $182 a year. Here's a look at our budget history. It shows what the final approved budget is at the very top since 2015-16, and then it shows what our audited or actual year-to-date revenues and expenditures came in and how that impacted fund balance. Over the last 2 years, while there was an anticipation of use of fund balance due to the pandemic and how operations were, there was obviously some savings in the expenditure side of our budget because of, again, how we were operating virtually and then how we slowly peel back in. But now that we're fully back into non-virtual and we're looking at how the economy is impacting budgets, we expect that those savings will slowly start to go away and that we'll fully start to use our expenditures in our budget now. So this just kind of gives an impact or a look at just kind of the whole snapshot of budget, what our tax increase was, and then how we landed at the end of those years. And then again, I wanted to go back through the budget process timeline. You'll see that the next two red areas is an anticipated another finance committee meeting to look at the proposed final budget. And then on May 16th at that meeting, we are looking for board approval of the 22-23 proposed final budget. So are there any questions, or do you want me to go to another slide? I can also share the Excel spreadsheet that kind of puts this all together in just numbers, which I will do right now.
I had a few small questions, if that's okay. Thank you. This was very helpful and very clear the way that you walked through that, and just always I'm appreciative of your ability to convey financial information in a digestible way. I think one question is just sort of I'm curious, that 0.75 increase in property value that you said, is that average or is that above average? That was the one thing I didn't have a sense of how that compares. Like,
I honestly, I don't, it depends on the community. So that
Gotcha.
makes it tough, and trying to do an apples to apples comparison. Like I will use I'll use Norristown because that's one that comes to mind immediately. It has 3 separate townships that feed into the school district. So
Right.
it has East Norton, West Norton, and then the borough of Norristown. Obviously, each of those communities' assessment are going to be different because of the community. So it's hard to do a benchmark in comparison to what other school districts are feeling, because they have different types of townships that feed into their school
Sure.
district. And then we only have the one township that feeds into ours. So we can look at what we're doing. It's always a positive
internally to our township, though, is that
Yes.
sort of the rate that you see in Springfield Township for property values?
Over the last 2 years, it flatlined. So I think it's a testament to some homes being built in the township. And so those assessments are coming onto the market now as those homes were built. So that's what I believe happened with the increase in the assessment.
Yeah, I think part of why I'm asking is because, you know, people always look to the school board about the taxes, but there are so many other factors in our township that also relate to how much revenue is generated for schools. And so I was just trying to understand sort of the property piece of that. But the other question I had is on one of the earlier slide, there was a category that was other local revenue and other state revenue. And I was just wondering if you could say like a sentence or two about what kind of things fall under that.
Sure. So
revenue source.
Sure. Other local revenue is we have things such as, it's called PERDA. And that's basically, we get reimbursed for utilities. It's a report that happens. So that comes in, that's about $45,000. We also have our pass-through funds for IDEA from the MCIU that comes in. That's about $180,000. We have earnings on investments. We have gate receipts for our athletics and our activities. We have donations. So it's the smaller, like $40,000 to $100,000 range. I try to highlight the major areas in our local revenue that have impact on our budget, that if we really had a swing either way, could really impact our budget. Those items would not have a big impact on our budget if they swung dramatically, because they're smaller. Collectively, obviously, they make that up, but going line by line with those, it just, the magnitude of the change with them is not that impactful. The ones that I highlighted are. And then on the other state revenue, or just giving you an idea about state revenue, we obviously talked about the retirement and the Social Security reimbursement, but it also includes our basic ed subsidy. It also includes our special ed subsidy, our transportation subsidy, our rental reimbursement. The board just approved PlanCon on Tuesday, PlanCon K. That's part of us getting reimbursed by the state. That's that piece of it. And then there are a couple of other small subsidies or grants that come, funding that come through with the state, but those are big heavy hitters on the state side.
Great. Thank you. That's really helpful to just know what's embedded in that other. And then the last thing I have, and I'm sorry, then I'll stop.
No, it's fine.
So, you know, this is not meant as any kind of, I know taxes are a sensitive issue, and so this is, I don't want this to be received as me not being supportive of the suggested increase, but I'm just curious, do you have numbers where you can show a scenario if we didn't increase at the 2.8 that you're suggesting of what would happen? Just because I think it would help strengthen the argument, right? You know, like, so even if there's a scenario of if we only did 2 or 2.5, you know, if we matched what was last year, here's the kind of deficit it would run for us to be able to continue to support our programs, would be really helpful in, you know, fully backing this increase and also being able to talk to the public about why that increase is needed.
Okay, so the scenarios should be 2 and 2.5.
No, I mean, I'm curious what other folks think would be a useful scenario. Either because it's increased last year was 2.5, is that right? Is what was on the slide. So, I think I don't want you to run multiple scenarios, but even just a scenario of if we stayed at last year's rate, which is, maybe the easiest one to run, right? Of like we stagnated there. Why is that not an option for us? And why do we need to move forward with an increase? It would be helpful to see the details of what's at stake if we did.
I could most definitely do that.
Yeah, that's really helpful. And thanks for bringing that up, Sarah, because I think last year when we did talk about budget increases, we talked a lot about, again, considering that we had those years where we didn't use a lot of, there were funds we didn't use, and that we would be getting this support from the federal government, but that's only time limited. So, going forward, we can't look to say not increase for several years and then all of a sudden need to increase a significant amount in order to just meet our minimum budget. So, I sort of see these years as kind of, softening the larger increase that may come or may not come. Maybe goods and services will go down, and maybe other things will change, or, God willing, federal government funds will continue to roll into districts. But, I do think we need to continue to plan for the future, not draw down too much on our fund balance, but balance that with, the impact on our taxpayers. I had a question actually kind of in that vein regarding the ESSER funds, the teachers and the 2 math specialists that are included in the ESSER funds, and what's the thinking about them going forward, and if there's anticipated continued need, and how we might be thinking about rolling them in, when we see addition of staff, while we need those staff, we just want to understand, I want to understand how they're being accounted for and going forward in the budget.
Sure. Do you want me to take that, or do you want that, Dr.?
I'm happy to take it. I think that's a good one for me to answer. And thanks for the question, Karen. So the 2 special education positions under ESSER and the 2 math specialist positions are directly tied to interventions as a result of impact of the pandemic on the education. So as an example, at Enfield, we have found in the lower grades that while the current kindergartners and first graders in particular are doing very well in meeting grade level expectations, the children who did not have preschool as a result of the pandemic for a few years, we're seeing increased needs for those children who are going to be coming in next year. So we're anticipating almost a doubling of students in the high need classrooms. And so that's part of the reason why we see expectation there. At the other end, we have students who we want to graduate on time. And for some of those students, that graduation will be 21 years old, students with more significant special education needs. But our numbers are up. And they have been going up even prior to the pandemic. The district, for good or ill, has a very strong reputation for doing a great job with students with special needs. And so we are finding that families are moving into the township in order to attend our schools to avail themselves of the services. And it's one of those, if you build it, they will come. And so we feel that it's important for us to be able to provide those supports. The other 2 special education positions that are built into the expenditure budget are at Erdenheim and the middle school. So in fact, our proposal is that we add a special education teacher at each of the 4 schools to lower caseload and to provide intervention for students who are either struggling coming through the pandemic or are just simply students due to increased numbers, increased enrollment in those areas.
Okay, thanks for clarifying that, because I just assumed that those 2 that were built into the budget were covered by ESSER. So this is actually 4 special education teachers?
It's 4 positions, and one of them actually is the position that we discussed this winter at Enfield, autistic support, that person is actually starting this month because the numbers have doubled there through the winter. So we have seen a significant increase in that need at Enfield. In addition, you see the 2 math specialists. So just as we have reading specialists at Enfield and Erdenheim, we've not had math specialists. And so the math specialists will very likely be positions we'll want to continue and to fold into the budget. And Ms. Green is aware of that interest in 2025. We would like to be able to afford that either through attrition of teachers who are retiring and then not replacing them if they're not needed, or through a reallocation of resources in the budget. But the math specialists are going to be assigned, if they're approved, they're going to be assigned at Enfield and Erdenheim. The goal there is to make sure that the foundational math skills are provided and those interventions are provided so that students, by the time they reach the middle school, are meeting with success. When we surveyed families in the community back in November, and we asked about how to allocate the ESSER dollars, the top 3 requests of the community were math intervention, reading intervention, and mental health resources. SEL and mental health resources. And actually SEL mental health was a very strong third, where roughly 3 in 4 families rated those 3 areas as the highest priority. So that's where we've placed the funds. We had already moved a reading specialist at Enfield from half-time to full-time last year as a result of knowing that we were going to have primary needs in core reading skills for students who had missed perhaps even a year or 2 or a year and a half of reading intervention at preschool. And so we're very happy that our winter scores, as you all know from academic affairs, our winter scores looked very good, but we still have some room to move in bringing all of our students back up to pre-pandemic levels by the end of the year. And that's our goal.
Okay, thank you. And then the other positions, the social studies teacher, I know we had added a social studies teacher last year. Is the social studies teacher at the middle school?
So the half-time social studies teacher at the high school was added last year due to class sizes. We had in social studies in particular, we had class sizes at 30, 31, 32. And we had a significant interest in social studies electives. So that was the request last year. Next year, the civics requirement for 12th graders goes into effect, but they must take a civics course. And our students would like to take their electives that they're interested in economics and psychology and advanced placement history, but they understand they have to take civics in order to graduate. So moving the social studies from half to full-time will allow us to offer the civics requirement while still retaining the electives. The gifted half a position is to add, we don't have gifted support at Enfield. And we begin to identify students with gifted education in the winter of first grade. So we start to evaluate in the winter of first grade. When second grade was at Erdenheim, we had a gifted support teacher who tried to cover 4 classrooms, 4 grade levels. And so that was actually 40 classrooms. And so now with second grade being at the new building, we don't have the feasibility from a schedule standpoint, nor from an enrollment standpoint. Our gifted numbers are very strong. And so we want to make sure that we're able to provide gifted support at Enfield. But because half of the students there, the fall semester first graders and all of the kindergartners, do not have gifted education, just as a matter of course, you don't assess until a little later. We really only need somebody half-time. And so that's that position.
And the assistant principal, that person has already started, correct?
She started this week.
Yeah.
So that position is in order to right size us with all the rest of the county's middle schools, where there are at least 2 assistant principals. Sometimes there's also, a separate athletic director, but we feel very confident that we can meet the needs with the staffing that we added this week.
Yeah, thanks. I appreciate that. I just really wanted to have a clear understanding of where we're counting those.
Absolutely. understood. And as I said a minute ago, I want to make sure you know, Ms. Green and I have talked about the fact that when the ESSER dollars run out, we are going to have to either find a way to roll those positions into the existing budget. And by then we anticipate indexes that will be lower than the current index, the next 3 years of indices, or we're going to have to reduce by attrition. So we recognize that that will be coming in 2025.
Okay, yep. Yeah, because next year's projected is 4.3, which is that next 2 years are amazing.
The next 2 years are 4.3, and then I think the year after, Ms. Green, I think it was 3.6.
Yeah.
So there are some very strong indices, and I don't know if it would be helpful to the committee members for Ms. Green to share with you how that index is constructed. You know, they are higher than they have been in recent years. The way I interpret that as a non-business administrator is this is the rate at which the state believes we can reasonably raise taxes. We have tried as a district always to come under index. We've committed to that without exceptions, and we try to utilize fund balance where we have some interest in growing. If ultimately the board would like a lower tax increase, we have two options. One option is for us to utilize more of fund balance, which we can certainly do if you choose that. The other is that we could delay or defer some of the decisions that we're making. So as an example, under technology, Ms. Green mentioned that our middle school Chromebooks are 4 years old, and we're seeing that they're failing. And as you might imagine, our students are hard on their Chromebook, right? They use their Chromebooks readily. We could go out a 5th year. It will increase our repair costs. It will increase our breakage. It will increase frustration for students, which is why we're recommending that we replace them this summer. But in theory, we could delay that if the board wanted us to reduce costs. We could wait on the 45 smart boards that are remaining to replace at the middle and high school. Currently, we're getting great feedback from students and from staff on the utilization of the new smart boards at Erdenheim, and in the few classrooms we've been able to add them at the middle and high school. But in theory, we could delay that and go out. Right now, they're 10 to 12 years old. We could take that further and use the existing smart boards. We could not replace the 7 or 8 year old computers for instructional support. So there are things we can do if the board would like to not use any more of the fund balance and also lower the tax increase. And those are some of the things that we have discussed as a team. We recognize that, ultimately that we want to be responsible to our taxpayers, whether or not their children are in our schools. But I personally feel like my job is to make sure that we bring forward a budget that does what we think we should do for our students next year, and then ultimately we'll adjust as the board would like.
Okay. Yeah, go ahead, Sarah. I see you're going to say something.
Oh no, please finish your thought. I didn't realize you had more.
No, I just, I was just going to piggyback on Sarah's prior request about, that projection for that, running that, the numbers for just a 2.5% so that we would hold steady. What would that look like? What would be the give and take, involved in that, and, how would those options affect that? So that's helpful.
Okay.
Can I just would you like us to bring you at 2.5? Here's the balance that would go to the fund balance, or would you also you want us to not touch fund balance and you'd like to see 2.5 and what we would eliminate from the budget? Do you want both or just one or the other?
I feel like both. I think
I also like to see both.
Yeah, we need to consider the impact on fund balance as well as impact on services for students.
Okay.
Sounds good. Thank you.
This is sort of a bigger picture question. I know in the immediate year it doesn't work, but I'm just curious if there has been any history of the school board consulting with or working in conjunction with the commissioners in our township to sort of look at their planning and trajectory. Also, just because the income for schools, since it is tied to economic development, and property values. And I'm just curious what that collaboration or conversation looks like if it does exist.
So I'm in communication with Mr. Taylor, so is Craig Thorne. We are apprised of any property developments that's coming and how that impacts. We also just had an updated enrollment study that we discussed and was given to the board members that was done by the planning commissioners at Monco. Why they are a good group to use is because because they're part of that process, they're able to see future developments and see how those developments will impact our student enrollment. So between those different resources, we do keep apprised of impacts. I think one of the development that's bringing properties that increased our assessment, that has been talked about for the last few years. And I think it kind of got put on hold because of COVID. So now, because I know that's one of the things in reviewing my predecessor, Ken King's information, when he was building in budget, that was always something that he was ready to peel into the budget and anticipating that our assessment would go up. So we do keep that in mind. But as far as I'm concerned, I don't like to hedge my bets and gamble that our assessment's going to go up until we get our certified letter. We get a certified estimated tax rolls in December. That tells us what the actual tax duplicate is going to be when tax bills go out. So that is the number that I use. And then we get monthly reports that identify any tax assessment changes throughout the year. So each month we get those reports. I analyze those, pay attention and benchmark those against where the tax duplicate is to see if there's an ebb and flow with it. So we do use a number of resources to pay attention to anything that will impact either positively or negatively our overall tax assessment in the township.
That's super helpful. Thank you. Yeah, I think I was just thinking also just longer term planning in general,
Yes.
like how that hand in hand partnership works. with the township.
Absolutely.
Can you
Constant communication.
remind me? I guess a long time ago, a couple years ago, I was on finance. Do we get income from the township taxes, or is it the other way around? Don't we get like a percentage?
So we split real estate transfer tax and earned income tax.
Okay. Yeah.
So that's a split with the township. So I think total the taxpayers pay a percent, and then half of that goes to the township, half of it goes to the district.
Okay.
Those are the two taxing sources that get split with the township.
Okay. Thank you.
Mhm. Is there any other questions?
So I just want to make sure that the committee is aware, and I know Mr. DeFranco wasn't able to join us, but we'll make sure he has all these same documents. So over the next month now, Ms. Green will continue to, for example, she'll get those May 1st numbers. She'll continue to tweak. We'll come back with the 2.5 proposal in both scenarios as you requested. And then at our May 12th finance meeting, we can have further conversation. You can provide us direction as to how you'd like the preliminary budget to be presented on May 16th. So that next finance meeting, we'll make whatever adjustments you like to bring the budget forward on May 16th, because then we have to make it public, as you know, before the final vote in June. And any direction any questions, please ask us. We're happy to answer. We want to make sure that you feel really comfortable with where we're headed.
Absolutely. And just to piggyback on Dr. Yannicone, there's 2 action items that will be needed in the upcoming months. So at the May meeting, if you look at that budget timeline, at the actual board meeting, we will need to approve the proposed final budget. So there's still time. We have 30 days in between the approval of the final budget if changes need to be made. So just as a refresher, approving the proposed final doesn't seal the deal and changes can't be made. It's just we have to check the box with the PDE's process. So there's things on our end that we have to do and report to PDE and publish and advertise and go through that process. So we will be looking for at that, I think it's the May 16th meeting, We will be looking for an adoption of the proposed final budget. And then at the June meeting will be the final budget. That will be the budget that is in place for the 22-23 school year. So we have 2 action items, but I just want to relay that we do have the ability to make some changes and do some tweaks in between that time. The June meeting is the meeting where that's the final budget, and that will be the budget that goes into place for 22-23. Okay.
So before we conclude the meeting, we have 2 community members who are in attendance. And for the members of the community who are watching the meeting, if you want to make public comment, this is at the end of the meeting, there's an opportunity for public comment. If you want to make that comment, you can let us know by raising your hand, and then our Mr. Oliver will promote you so that you can ask that question or make that comment. So actually, I just see 1 attendee. I apologize. So Mrs. Reeves, if you have any questions, you can just raise your hand and let us know. Okay, I see your hand. So Mr. Oliver, would you promote Mrs. Reeves so she can make her comment or ask her question?
Hi, good morning. I just wanted to say I actually didn't have a question, Dr. Yannicone, but thank you very much for this excellent presentation. It was very informative. I just wanted to thank you very much for this time this morning.
Thank you. Thank you for joining us. We appreciate having members of the community interested.
Oh, you know I am. Thank you, Dr. Yannicone.
Sounds good. All right. So with no other comments or questions, I think we can conclude the meeting. Everybody okay?
Yep, we're good. Thank you, Kara. It was a great presentation.
Yeah,
Very
thanks
thorough.
very much.
Yeah,
Thank you.
thank you.
Have a good
Thank you,
day.
Have a good
everybody.
day.
Have a great day.
Take care.